Hello, welcome to my office. I'm sitting at my desk and I'm going through the many questions that you have all sent in. It's really great that there is so much engagement from so many social media users around the world in response to our call to ask me questions. In fact, we have received a large volume of questions, many from young people. It also shows a strong interest in human rights, which I'm very grateful for. And to be honest, human rights is actually asking difficult questions. It's about not being afraid of engaging in discussions and in a debate from different perspectives, even when we have strong disagreements. In fact, that's exactly what drives positive change in any society. So I will attempt to respond to as many questions that I possibly can, but myself and my colleagues, including those who are working in different countries around the world, will be very much looking forward to engaging further with you and responding to as much as possible your concerns and your aspirations and your hopes. So there was a whole cluster of questions around conflict, around human rights violations. In fact, there were hundreds of comments, questions about wars, about insecurity, about violations of human rights inside and outside conflict situations in the occupied Palestinian territory, in Israel, in Sudan, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Haiti, Syria, Bangladesh, to name just a few. Let me respond to that. We have currently the highest number of conflicts in the world, over 59, which means that civilians suffer, especially women and children, and they suffer enormously. And it is absolutely important that we find a way to come back to respect for international law, protection of civilians, but also to recognize that the right to peace is the mother of all human rights. We know that without peace, all human rights are quashed. I have met people who have lost entire families in Gaza. I've also met with families of Israeli hostages that are still held in Gaza. I've met with Sudanese young people who have been affected by the violence. I've met with people, with students around the world whose most fervent wish is to see change in their countries. It is so absolutely key in these situations to come back to human rights as the moral compass that allows us to move away from a picture of either for us or against us, either my enemy or my friend. Human rights is about everyone. It is compassion for everyone. It really is about the essence of humanity. In the current world, we see too much of binary thinking. We see too much of us versus them. And that leads to a lot of divisions. It leads to a lot of polarization. And polarization can lead to violence. Let me move to the next cluster of questions. A lot of you have asked about hate speech, xenophobia, attacks against minorities. And you have mentioned that there is a lot more hate-filled narratives and speech, including by political figures. And I have to say, I unequivocally condemn such speech. Hate speech, incitement to violence, is one of the worst scourges in our world today. We know that movements that advocate against someone else who is different have gained strength. They have gained traction, and we also know that civil society organizations, human rights defenders that advocate for the rights of minorities, that advocate for LGBTIQ plus communities, that advocate for people with disabilities, that advocate for indigenous peoples, for people of African descent, are often getting more and more inflammatory rhetoric against them. They sometimes don't even get the support that they need. They sometimes get attacked, including physically. This is really dangerous because the world needs more of us coming together, of us being united. And especially when we see so much backlash and pushbacks on human rights, we need to join forces, we need to break down the silos, and we need to come back to the basics of what human rights is all about. it's our compass. It helps us all to be united in the way that we interact with each other and interact with the world. But it also means that we cannot lose the hard-fought gains that have been achieved over the past decades. And it's a call for each and every generation to go back to the basics of human rights and to understand them and to reacquire them in the current context. The next set of issues, it's about accountability and impunity. And in fact, I'd like to quote one question. How can we move toward a system where real consequences exist for parties that infringe on human rights? And someone else had asked, how can Volker Türk and UN Human Rights ensure accountability for nations that sign human rights treaties yet fail to implement them effectively, especially in cases of systemic violations? I have to say, the issue of accountability and impunity is one that has been on the top of the human rights agenda for many, many years. And we have seen progress on that front. We have seen international criminal tribunals being established. We have seen institutions that including at the national level, that are there to punish perpetrators, to prosecute them. But we have also seen that impunity and the lack of accountability are real negative factors that perpetuate conflict, that perpetuate violence. So it is critical that we address accountability and impunity issues. And it's a call for everyone, not only to take it seriously, but also to focus on victims and survivors, to provide support to them, to be in solidarity with them, but also to make sure that the legal systems are up to standard and that they are able to deliver to justice those who have committed serious human rights violations. But I fully understand your frustration because sometimes these systems take much too long. At the same time, we have also seen, even after many years, that perpetrators are brought to justice, even if at this point in time we think it's not realistic. They are being brought to justice. And it is really critical that we step up our efforts to support the international order, that we support the institutions that were set up to provide them, including, of course, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, but also the type of things that we are doing within my office. I mean, we continue to be out there on a daily basis, documenting, reporting on human rights violations. Some of my colleagues are risking their lives for it, and precisely to tell the stories of those whose rights are violated. And we can only continue doing this and working on it tirelessly so that we tell the stories of those who are affected by the gruesome effects of violations. So the next cluster of questions, and I will read it to you because it's a summary of many, many questions that you have had, is around human rights defenders. And what you have been asking is, given the amount of repression and backlash that activists across the world are experiencing, including such things as enforced disappearances, prolonged pretrial detention, abductions and torture, including the right to bail, what are some of the mechanisms that you guys are putting into place to protect human rights defenders across the world? First of all, a big shout out to all the human rights defenders around the world who go out there, who at the grassroots level work with communities, who want to fight for the rights of people. We are here, we are in solidarity, we stand with you. And when you report back to us, we follow up. And it may not be, you may not see the results immediately, but you will see them over time because it comes to changing legislation, it comes to helping people get out of detention, it comes to making sure that we are present when trials occur. This is the daily work of many of my colleagues on the ground, and some of whom are actually themselves at risk as a result of it. I have, unfortunately, 8 of my colleagues who are currently held in detention, arbitrary detention in Yemen, in the Houthi-controlled areas, which is, of course, a huge preoccupation of mine, and I hope very much that everyone currently arbitrarily detained is released, and I call on governments to do that, including, of course, my own staff. The next cluster of issues is around climate justice, climate action. And in fact, if you put it to the point, it's, do you believe that human rights have the potential to fill the gaps that the climate regime has created? I feel for all of the young people, the children that I have had a chance to engage with about their worries of the future. And the top worry that comes up is actually climate change. They're already experiencing it, especially people in areas where flooding occurs more often than not, where hurricanes destroy whole communities, where drought is almost visible and as a result deprives people, especially women and children, of their livelihoods. It is the fight of our lifetime, because if you think of someone who is born today, what his or her life is going to be, and when they are as old as I am, I cannot even imagine. So for us, it is absolutely critical that we mobilize and we make sure that climate change, climate action, climate justice is actually achieved. We need more political engagement, we need much more political leadership, and we need to make sure that everyone makes this the battle of their lifetime, because that's one of the biggest threats that humanity faces. We don't hear enough about it anymore. There was a whole movement, a social movement in the past around climate justice. I fear that some of that energy has been lost, but it is absolutely critical that social movements of today look to the future, not only look to the present, but also to the future, to address this big fight that we have in front of us. Because when I hear that the objective of ensuring that global warming doesn't go beyond 1.5 centigrade, I'm very worried, because the world is already looking quite volatile with the current warming that is going on. You can imagine what this means when we don't even meet the most basic of objectives. And the only thing I can say, we all need to work together on this. It's one of our big battles that we have in front of us. Climate justice and climate action concerns everyone. We are all in the same boat. We all have to see what we can do within our sphere of influence. We are continuing to make sure that we document, that we lobby, that we advocate for climate action. But our movement can only be as strong as all of you are engaged in it. And we cannot allow climate denial to continue, because it's extremely dangerous. We cannot allow that today's politics is not taking this as a top priority. And that, frankly, depends on each and every one of us. Another set of questions is about, frankly, the value. What is the value today of the United Nations? And what is it that we're doing when we face so many calamities around the world? I mean, let me be clear about it. We have to really understand that the United Nations works in the most remote corners of this world. They provide humanitarian assistance to those most in need. They identify people who are in need of protection. My own colleagues are out there, often in very stressful and dangerous circumstances, making sure that we analyze and document human rights violations, that we report on them, that we are the bridge between civil society, human rights defenders, and the institutions of the state, that we actually provide a protective framework within which people can have open discussions. So what we are doing on a daily basis is standing with those who fight for their rights and defend them as well. And we are with them. But it is also true that when you look especially at action by member states, I wish there is more political leadership to ensure that we end up in a much more peaceful, more equitable world. And that leadership is one that we are advocating for. We really want that leadership to become more visible. And that's extremely frustrating also for us. But we must not fall into the trap of those who seek to divide us. It is really important, especially among human rights movements, among the different movements, among the different areas that we all care for, that we act in solidarity with each other, that we understand each other. We also agree to disagree in a constructive way, because of course, neither any country, nor any society, nor the UN is perfect. We are constantly learning from each other, and we need this continued engagement. We need to ask ourselves what we can do better every day when we wake up. And let's not forget, the United Nations is the foundation that was built after horrific events, 2 world wars, the Holocaust, atrocity crimes. And it was meant to build together a foundation for the world that is based on norms and principles. And these are the norms that guide us today, that allow us to look at situations, that allow us to evaluate them, and that allow us also to push back against those who want to throw glitter in our eyes and engage in this politics of distraction. Next cluster of questions around, especially from human rights defenders, around gender-based violence. And the question is, High Commissioner, our efforts to protect women from sexual violence are being wiped out by incessant wars. How can you help us so that these women are really involved in the peace negotiations in accordance with Resolution 1325? This is an incredibly important point. I fully agree, and I have been advocating very strongly that any peace negotiation of today and of the future needs to involve meaningfully women and also young people. In fact, we have a lot of examples. Colombia is one, but many others as well, when peace processes become successful because of the involvement of women leaders. And we support, my office has, when we look into peace processes, we always support, we identify women leaders, we identify women who can be at the negotiating table, and we make sure that we not only get them to the negotiating table, but also ensure that they are protected while they are part of this. Again, it is absolutely critical. We achieve gender parity when it comes to representation of women, and this can start outside conflict situations. It's absolutely critical. And we are present on the ground in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Sudan, in the Central African Republic, in Haiti, in many other countries where indeed we have witnessed and we have responded to survivors of sexual violence, providing not only essential services, but also documenting what happened to them so that we can actually promote accountability for those who committed these horrific acts. And we constantly urge authorities to stop it, and we have methods now developed to instill a zero-tolerance policy for sexual violence. There was a whole cluster of questions around misinformation and disinformation. And when we go through the hundreds of questions on social media, I also observed that you are much more interested in better understanding how we work, how the United Nations works. And frankly, this is really essential because we need to counteract misinformation, especially in digital spaces. And I'm frankly very worried about it. Societies cannot afford the death of truth. We need facts. We need an open space, an open public space where we can discuss policies, where we can discuss situations, but on the basis of facts, not on the basis of misinformation, not on the basis of conspiracy theories that are often circulating in many different ways. Of course, this has always happened, for a long time, even before social media platforms. But we also know that they can become so much more amplified in today's age. And I would really ask all of you, before you spread any information or before you repost, be aware, is it right? Is this actually correct? Have you checked the sources? And otherwise, it could influence public opinion. It could even lead to hate speech. We have seen this in many conflict situations. It could lead to attacks against people that are absolutely unacceptable. And we need to really find better ways to counter not only misinformation and disinformation, but also understand better where we get our news from, our facts from. I can just refer you to our own website. We have, on many situations around the world, issued not only public comments and media statements, but also on our different social media accounts, grappled with many situations precisely because we care about the universality of human rights, and it applies to everyone. There is no exception to it. And which is, as a result, if you look at the whole long list of statements that we have made, the reports that we issue on a yearly basis, you will see that there is a lot of material to go through to actually look at what facts, law, and compassion mean in today's world. And human rights are a very important provider of precisely that truth. One of the greatest achievements of humanity over the last 80 years or so is precisely that we have human rights, that they are recognized, that they are obligations of the law that need to be respected by everyone, everywhere, irrespective of where you live, irrespective of who you are. That's really one of the biggest achievements because it gives us a moral compass. It gives us also, it makes sure that states have obligations that they need to respect. And let's not forget that the history of human rights is nourished by this urge for freedom, this urge to overcome domination and suppression. It really goes back to brave women and men who, for the last couple of hundred years, fought for their liberation. The Haitian Revolution is a good example. It was the first revolution against slavery, against colonization, against racism. But then we had the whole decolonization process. We had the process of the anti-apartheid movement. We had the women's movements that fought for equality of women and men. We have the movement of the LGBTIQ+. We have the movements of people with disabilities. We have the anti-racism movement. So all of these different social movements, the labor movement, of course, as well, we have all of those because of the courage of people who stand up everywhere around the world for their rights and for the freedoms. And the beauty of it is that this is universal. Let no one deny that universality because it is about each and every one of us, and it has deep traditions in all religions, in all cultures, in all continents. Those who say that that's not the case, don't believe them.